All right, today we are diving into The Gospel of Divine Prosperity by Derek Abishua. Now, that's a phrase that can definitely bring up some strong reactions, right? For some people, it's a promise of hope. For others, it's a huge red flag. So let's just get straight into what the book actually says. Right out of the gate, the author, Derek Abishua, lays his cards on the table. He actually admits that he used to be really uncomfortable with this whole topic. And, that's a pretty smart way to start because it kind of disarms any skepticism you might have. He's basically saying, hey, I get it. I've been there too. So, the very first thing the book does is try to completely redefine the word prosperity. It makes the case that we are not just talking about money here. Not at all. Instead, it presents divine prosperity as this total holistic state of well-being that touches every single part of your life. We're talking spiritual, relational, physical, and financial. Now, to make this point, the author doesn't just invent a new definition. He actually reaches way back to the ancient Hebrew concept of shalom. And by doing this, he frames prosperity not as some modern get-rich-quick idea, but as this timeless, ancient principle of complete wholeness and peace. The book builds its whole argument on 4 key pillars, so we're going to walk through them. First, what it says is God's core desire for you. Then the 3 keys that supposedly unlock it, the ultimate purpose behind it all, and finally, how to tackle the barriers that you're probably going to face. All right, let's start with that foundational premise. God's desire for you. This is pillar number 1, and it explores the book's interpretation of God's fundamental character and motivation. The book makes this big theological idea feel really simple, with an analogy we can all get: a parent and their child. I mean, think about it. If a loving human parent wants the absolute best for their kids, why wouldn't a perfect, divine parent want the same? Or even more? The argument here is that the goal is for a life of thriving, not just barely surviving. And this idea is backed up with a verse from the book of Psalms, which says, God takes pleasure in the prosperity of his servant. So in this view, that holistic well-being we talked about isn't just something God puts up with, it's something he actually delights in. Okay, so if that's the desire, how does it actually work? How does one access it? Well, that brings us to section 2, what the book calls the 3 essential keys to achieving the state of abundance. The book presents these 3 keys almost like parts of a machine. God's word is the blueprint. It shows you how it's all supposed to work. Your faith is the ignition switch that starts it all up. And then your giving is the engine that actually drives everything forward. Now, to explain that 3rd key, giving, which can be a tricky one, the book uses this really powerful farming analogy. It totally reframes generosity not as a loss, but as an investment. A farmer can't expect a harvest by hoarding all their seed in the barn, right? They have to sow it. The book argues that the exact same principle applies here. And this idea is rooted in a New Testament verse that presents giving and receiving as a kind of spiritual law. The principle is that your act of giving actually sets the standard for what you get back. And the book really emphasizes that the return is meant to be overflowing, totally abundant. So this all leads to a really crucial question. If someone actually achieves this divine prosperity, what's the point? What's it all for? This next section digs deep into the why behind the what. I love this analogy. Think of it like a ship. According to the book, prosperity isn't the final destination. Nope. It's the vehicle itself, the ship, fully equipped and supplied for a much, much bigger mission. A ship just sitting in a harbor might be beautiful and safe, but it's not fulfilling its purpose. It's going nowhere. And right here, that mission gets defined. The book points to a verse in Deuteronomy to argue that the whole purpose of gaining wealth isn't for personal luxury, but to establish his covenant. In other words, to be a resource for funding and fueling God's plans and promises here on earth. But this all raises a really obvious question, doesn't it? What about the reality that so many people struggle financially and in other ways? The final section of the book actually addresses these real-world barriers head-on. The author leans right into that skepticism, asking the exact question that's probably on many readers' minds. By just acknowledging this tension between the book's claims and the reality we see, it sets the stage for the final piece of the puzzle, some practical advice. So instead of seeing struggles as just failures, the book kind of flips the script and reframes them as opportunities. It lays out several strategies for navigating hardship, and they all center on applying the principles we've already discussed. Things like maintaining faith, continuing to be generous even when it's hard, and focusing on the resources you already have. So ultimately, the book's entire argument is a challenge for us to shift our perspective, to move away from just thinking about accumulation. It leaves us with a final, really provocative question. The point isn't how large your resources are, but about the significance of what you're actually building with them.